I remember I had a knee surgery, and knee surgery. I don't remember that
Hello, okay, well, good evening, everybody. It's 6:01. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And the first order of business would be to stand and pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so the first point on the agenda will be a presentation by Rick Timmons, and he will be introduced by Dave Siskey, who is the superintendent of the Board of Cooperative Education. I'm not going to read what we've spoken about. Always nice to return to this part of Montgomery County. Again, Dave Siskey, I am the district superintendent of the HFM Moses, 7 years there, but prior to that, I worked at schools throughout Montgomery County, Fort 4 years as superintendent of Fort Plains, so really a pleasure to be here. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Rick Timmons, who will provide an independent, in-depth analysis of the financial condition and long-term outlook for both the Canajoharie and Fort Plains Central School Districts. Dr. Timmons is the executive director of the statewide School Finance Consortium, an organization representing more than 400 school districts across New York State. He's a retired BOCES district superintendent and previously led the Erie 2 Chicago Cattaraugus BOCES, serving 27 districts. He's also been a superintendent in both large and small districts. Throughout his career, Dr. Timmons has been widely recognized for his expertise in school finance, data-driven decision-making, and equitable funding for students. Rick has carefully examined each district's finances and projected future trends. He also analyzed the potential fiscal impact of merger and settlement, including projections for a merged district. His work builds on the fiscal portion of your merger study, providing much more detail, and is intended to help inform both boards and the community as you continue to thoughtfully consider this important decision. We appreciate Dr. Timmons' commitment to public education and his ability to explain complex financial information clearly for boards. I'm sure you've heard Dr. Timmons speak many times. I've learned an awful lot from him, and I'm really happy he's here to help you with this important work that you've undertaken. So please welcome Dr. Rick Timmons.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been a superintendent of schools of the same size as Fort Plains and Canajoharie in the past, and I've worked with school districts throughout my entire career, which is really a long time. And actually, my doctoral dissertation was on school district mergers, pluses and minuses. So what we're going to go through is basically my general report here. I'm not going to belabor or read every single slide to you, but I am going to emphasize the most important part. I think the basic thing is that an understanding of what school district finance entails is really important. A lot of times people don't understand how complicated it is, because it is complicated. We're dealing with tens of millions of dollars in each school district. We're talking about the education of these children. We're going to launch all these children into their future lives. Every day, school is so important. So what we're going to do is we're going to take, so everything you see in blue, whenever you see it in blue, it's big enough you can probably read yourself. It was in the report. And what I'm going to do is when you see black print, that'll be my comments about what was in the report. So what I've done is I've actually spent a couple of months going through the budgets of every single school district in the area report, which is Canajoharie and Fort Plains. I've analyzed their revenues, their expenditures, their debt service. I've gone through a whole bunch of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the comments that were made. So up here it's just telling you a little bit more about what I do. And right now I'm working on 42 presentations to school districts on what we call long-range financial analysis. In other words, we dig deep into their budgets to find out the history of what they've done in their budgets and what the future holds based on current trends. And that's really what this is about. The other thing, too, is I'm interested in the financial stability of school districts. I hope you do understand we're in a hyperinflation period right now, and actually we have been for the last 4 or 5 years. There's a lot of restrictions on school districts, there's a lot of promise, and of course there's a lot of hope for school districts that everybody really wants to come to fruition. So I'm going to use this LRFA method that I've developed, and I've used for 4 decades, and I've used for probably hundreds and hundreds of school districts. And I'm going to use it for these 2 school districts. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to come up with a long-range financial analysis that talks about budgeting guidelines and strategies for these school districts. I'm going to talk about their reserves and their fund balances and their debt service. I'm just going through the list here. Calculation of their surpluses and revenues and expenditures. I'm going to talk about the tax cap and how it's affected these districts. The inclusion of the reorganization aid is promised by the state and is written into law, so that if a school district does merge, it is impossible for the state to renege on it because there's a law obligating them to pay for it. Same thing with reorganization building aid, a special category. Recommendations about the creation and maintenance of reorganized districts. In other words, if they were to merge, people decide to say yes. And if they decide to say no, I'm going to show you pictures of what I think they're going to look like if it's a no or it's a yes, from my point of view. And then what we're going to do is do this presentation tonight. So what we did is we dug into these 21 topics. Now some of these you may be familiar with, some not. So let me just go through them very quickly. The first one is the ST3 forms. These are the official forms that are filed with the State Education Department every year by the school district. These are required to be filed. They show where every penny came from, every penny went, where the savings accounts are, how much fund balance there is, what kind of reserves there are, all the different types of funds. They're just filled with all the financial information. These forms are filled out as a result of the audit by the external auditor. It's required by law, where they audit your school district annually. So these forms are the result of that audit. The next one is State Education Department. I don't know if you're aware of this, but your districts are heavily dependent on state aid. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you the state aid for each of your school districts. I'm going to show you how it works. I'm also going to show you how it doesn't work. Because really, it's kind of a broken system, to be honest with you. I spent a lot of time working with legislators to improve it. But there's a lot of resistance to improve the aid, because it'll send more money to the school districts, and the legislature wants to have it for their own projects. So I'm going to go over that. 3, capital projects, bonds, anticipation notes, and so on, debt service. This is important because what happens is districts have huge numbers of buildings, and look at the room we're in right now. And they have infrastructure needs, utility needs, electrical needs, HVAC needs, we've got plumbing needs, we've got mechanical needs, we've got structural needs, we've got roofs that are big. There's a lot going on in the school districts. We've got to look at all that debt service. Other related foundation aid. I'm going to talk specifically about a type of aid called foundation aid. It is a major revenue source for your school district. And guess what? It's not moving very fast. Matter of fact, I don't think it's going to move at all in future years. So I think you're going to all be constrained by revenue from the state. The next one is the related state aid called expense-driven aids. You do get aid for some transportation systems. You do get some extra aid from the state for building projects. You do get it for BOCES services and so on. But you know what? It's only a partial reimbursement. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but you have to pay for everything first and then wait for the aid to fly in here from the state. For instance, for capital projects, you pay for the whole capital project up front. And you wait 15 years to get your money. When you buy a single bus, it takes them 5 years to pay you back. And it's only a partial reimbursement. They don't pay for the whole bus. BOCES aid is always paid the year after you buy the services. So there's a big delay there, so therefore districts need cash flow. I'm going to talk a little about the types of reserves by the district, and number 7, capital reserves in particular. Because reserves are rainy day funds. Keep in mind the school district budgets are supposed to be big enough so that whatever goes wrong, you can pay for it out of the budget. For instance, I challenge anybody basically to tell me how many new special needs children will arrive in this district next year that aren't here now. What program are we in? How much the programs will cost? Anybody tell me how many people are going to be in a car accident or get terminally ill and need substitutes to cover them and also pay them as they're out on leave? Did anybody tell me the interest rates we're going to get from banks next year? Does everybody understand the point? The point is that we've got to make sure we've got enough to cover. You overestimate your revenues and you come in short, you can't tax it in. And by the way, both districts are already running to their rainy day funds. This is their reserve. And so what happens here is that sooner or later, just like your family savings account, it may run out. The degree to the fund balance history. We're going to talk about fund balances and what they are and why they're needed, and how cash flow works, and how the calendar works for finances. We're going to talk about tax cap calculations. Whether, there is a tax cap out there, and I think everybody's aware of it, and everybody thinks it's a 2% tax cap. I hate to tell you this, but there's no such thing as a 2% tax cap. I'm actually mathematically going to prove it to you. There never was and never will be. If it comes out 2%, it'd be by law. We absolutely answer. But there's financial events that have implications on your tax cap. There's pilot agreements that come in, there's debt service that can come in, inflation affects your tax cap, and guess what else? Property values. In both districts, property values, the tax bases are growing. It's affecting your tax cap. Matter of fact, it's affecting your rate because the state is watching your property values grow. And they're making decisions about how much money they should send to you because of the growth of your property values. The next one is the potential events that could affect your cap by the office of the controller. The controller likes to make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted in finance. And so do I, as a matter of fact. So I've gone through your budget with a fine-tooth comb as well. The use of fund balances, appropriated and unappropriated. So this means how much money you're allowed to have in cash versus what the law allows versus what you can use it for. So I'm going to talk about all those things. I don't know if you're aware, but every year, your districts, at least as far as I know back to 2012-13, your revenues have never equaled your actual expenditures other than by using your own reserves. Interesting. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about projected teachers' retirement system rates and employee retirement system rates. Not to pick on them, of course, but the reason is because they're big numbers. They're large costs. The district cannot negotiate an equal rate, and by law, they're guaranteed to every employee in the school district. And these have different tiers, and there's different rates, and some of these rates are increasing, some are a little stable. So we're going to talk a little bit about that because it's a big ticket item. We're also going to talk about the contractual obligations of the district. When I was a superintendent, I just didn't want to hire any teacher. I always wanted to invest in the brightest. And to do that, I had to be competitive with the school districts around me. When my salary schedule was not competitive, I did not get the best in the brightest. And therefore, my kids suffered. And my goal as a superintendent, and that's the goal of board members, that's why they call it the Board of Education, is to provide a robust program for these children. Because we're launching the rest of their lives from here. So we're going to talk about those contractual obligations. The analysis of the budgets due to loss of pilot agreements. The state is doing more and more pilot agreements. I don't know if you're aware of this, but if a pilot agreement is in your tax cap calculation and it goes away, your tax cap automatically goes up. And people then are resistant because they think, why did it go up? It should be only 2%. Well, that's because the pilot used to be sending money to the school district, now is in the tax rolls. You have tax to go get the pilot money because they moved the money. Then we're going to talk a little bit about tax levy history, how much they've collected compared to how much they spent. The district's revenue and expenditure variance history. What's the difference between what they budget and what they actually get for revenues, and what they budget and what they actually spend for expenses? We're going to talk about that. How about pending statute, regulation, or decisions of the commissioner that might have implications for the district's future? Well, that's really important. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's some new mandates coming down the road, and there's some new mandates, recent mandates, shall I say, that are going to affect your two school districts like crazy. One is called the Zero Emission Bus Mandate. I don't know if you're aware of this, but by the 27-21 school year, which is about a year and a half away, your school district will be required to only buy zero-emission buses. Does anyone know how much a zero-emission bus is? This is a trick question. How's it? The answer is anything they want to charge you. Understand what I just said? When this mandate was first passed, they were thinking the price of these buses was around $375, and the price would go down. Districts that can afford them, that have huge fund balances, huge tax bases that can't buy them, small square miles, are now buying for around $434,000 each. And the state will help reimburse it to a certain extent, but it'll take them not 5 years like currently, it will take them 8 years. So you will wait longer for your money, and you will spend almost 2.5 times the amount of money you're spending now. Oh, by the way, you have to have your entire fleet transferred to these buses by 2035. I believe across the state this will cost approximately $20 billion. Okay? So, the other one I think that we've got to talk about is a new statute, it's a regulation, is the 88-degree rule. So schools that have more than one story, this could be a problem. If a room gets to the classroom gets over 80 degrees, you have to move the kids. Or you have to provide air handling units, which will probably be air conditioning, so that you can change the temperature in the room. Because you're not allowed to be in a room at 88 degrees. So you have to either have a lot of spare rooms or you have to put in air conditioning. All I hear is cash registers are going off. I don't know if many of you people remember what a cash register was, but you can see the world is changing. The other thing, too, is I think there's a new one coming up. The governor's trying to get this one passed right now. I believe it will pass. It's a great educational initiative, but there could be some costs attached to it. And that is called universal pre-kindergarten. So universal pre-kindergarten. In 28-29, that school year, remember school years start in July and then in June. So that's why we have a 2-year thing, 27, 28, 29, 30, and so on. In 28-29 year, any 4-year-old that presents to the school district must be educated by that school district. Anyone. Any resident 4-year-old. So if the only thing is you got to figure out how many you're going to have. 23 years out. So it might be too early to look at live births. And people move around a lot. So it's going to be a guessing game by school districts. So this could be a real problem. Because we have rural districts generally, and we do have some hamlets and villages around here, the truth of it is most kids will be transported to school like they are now. But then you have to transport the UPK kids because they're certainly not going to walk. The problem in a lot of districts don't seem common is, well, we got a little room on the bus for another 5 or 6 kids each bus, no problem. But that is not the problem. The problem is, I don't know if you've ever gone behind the bus trying to pick up a kindergarten in the snow. They do not go up to the bus, they skip, they dial, they run around, they drop their papers, they do a lot of things. And they're cute doing it, but we're all waiting for them to get on the bus. But what happens here is what's going to happen is we're going to have more driver time. So we're going to end up paying more wages to get these kids to school. It's not like that. And you're going to have more bus idleness, so you're going to pay more fuel. So those are some ones that I'm concerned about right now. Evidence of long-range financial planning. Each of these districts, I believe, has tried to do some long-range planning insofar as possible. And when I go through their reserves, you'll see that what I mean, and I think they've done a pretty good job. Things are getting a little out of hand, and state requirements are growing immensely. And then I want to personally congratulate both the school business officials in each of the districts and the superintendents and the interim superintendent as well for being patient with me for 2 months, being grilling them to death over all the finances and having them dig up all the audit reports and the SD3s and all the documents, improve these numbers, find out those numbers, and then be comparing it to law, looking at their audits, and driving them crazy. But they were good soldiers, they did a good job. So what we're going to do is just like a little introduction, and what we're going to do is what it says here, the question was, are both districts sustainable under current trends and predictions? So I'm going to divide their sub-question into 3 questions. Both Canajoharie and Fort Plain districts are fiscally stable at present. However, the projections indicate expenditures are growing faster rate than revenues, leading to the likelihood of budget deficits as early as next fiscal year. And without adjustments such as reducing costs, increasing revenues, or leveraging efficiencies from merger, both districts face challenges maintaining balanced budgets in the future. We're just going to address those 3 questions right away. So the thing is true. They are stable right now. In fact, they've done a nice job. But the way they're becoming stable is actually by using their own money to balance their own budget. Sooner or later, your own money works out. So in other words, you start actually using it up. So they're doing well. They've got budgets in place. They built the budget. But the thing is, they've started using some reserves in the short term, some cash in the short term. But they have a budget for next year that I consider to be a proper budget. So to that point, number 1, true. The next one is, the thing we got to talk about is their state aid. That's the problem. Part of the problem is revenue. It's not just expenses. Remember, even your household budget boils down to two things: money in, money out. That's really it. So the big thing is that they are both what they call hold harmless or save harmless. Here's the definition right here, so you can read it on your own. But what it is this: there's a formula for every segment of aid. Every type of aid has a specific formula. All right? And the formula for foundation aid in particular, which is the largest aid category, is old. It's 17 years old. It's very antiquated. And according to this formula, neither one of these two districts should receive any more money, probably forever. Matter of fact, it's actually worse than that. According to the formulas for each of these districts, the state would contend that both of these districts are receiving too much money. And that's going to be a weird one. So let's take a look at some state aid. So I'm going to start off with Canajoharie. I'm going to go through each school district state aid. The idea here is full disclosure. We're not going to try and hide anything. We're not going to try and move anything around. We want to go through everything so you can see it all up here. I'm going to start off with foundation aid. Right there at the top, little red box. Notice it's the biggest number on the page except for the total. That's important because that is a major revenue stream. School districts have two major revenue streams. One's called state aid, and the other one is called taxes. That's basically it. Everything else is miscellaneous. So if you can see up here in foundation aid, for instance, Canajoharie in 23-24 was paid $10,781,000 and change in this foundation aid. And it says full funded. See that? It says full funded. Did you know that that's the first time in 17 years that they received the proper amount of aid? All the years before that, they were shorted in aid. The state didn't have enough money to pay them the aid that was due. So what happens, of course, is then everybody starts saying, well, this is looking better now. We finally got our money. Next year, we'll probably get an increase. If you'll notice, go to the next year, 24-25, and you'll see it's the same number. Everybody see that? It's the same number. So in other words, you've got two bosses that are giving you revenue. One's called the state, the other's called taxes. And a boss that usually pays you about $10 million or $11 million just said, I'm not giving you any more money. This should have been a red bell going off in everybody's head. You can see it coming. We're going to have some problems. Right off the bat, that's a red bell. And you can see because it's a major revenue source. The next year, you'll notice it goes up 3.1%. So just to show you, see if I get my little red dot in here. There's the 3.1. I got a little green dot there. I hope you can see it. That's the foundation aid increase between here and here. It's interesting because they did finally get an increase in foundation aid. But you know why they got an increase in foundation aid? They got an increase in foundation aid because they had an influx of special needs children that had high-cost programs. That's why they got the increase. So let me give you an example. Everybody in the room is a superintendent for a minute here. And last year you had 1,000 pupils in your school district. And so did I. And this year you all have 900. And so do I. So we're all in the same boat, right? Wrong. The devil is in the details. Between last year and this year, you lost 100 general ed kids. Those kids that go through life every day, just getting an education and living their life. You lost 100, that's how you got to 900. From 1,000 to 900. But I lost 150 of them. But I gained 50 special needs kids. Could be autistic, could be learning disabled, could be a whole bunch of things. So we both have 900 kids, but my educational burden to those children and the cost of that is much greater than all of yours. And that's what happened over here at Canajoharie. Large increase. So the state helped pay. Now, if we go to the next year, you'll notice we're going to get a 1% increase. A whopping $111,000. What are we going to do with all the money? It may sound like a lot to you if it was your salary, but not when you're trying to run a district that's worth $30 million. So the point here would be is, we couldn't hire probably a first, second, or third year teacher, pay for their pension, pay for their salary, their workers' compensation, and their Social Security, and their health insurance with that money. We couldn't even get one. Third year teacher. Not with this competitive money. It will go someplace else rather than here. So that's not a lot of money. Now the legislature is arguing over this right now. They're trying to get it to 2%, but the governor's resisting. Let's see if she falls and we get it. The interesting thing is that if you look down here at the bottom, you'll see this 423,000. You see what happened is the governor says, okay, I'll agree to give you 11,231,000, but I want you to know, Canajoharie, that the formula says you should only get 10,808,000. So I'm going to give you 423,000 that I don't think you deserve. Matter of fact, last year, when the Rockefeller Institute was a big study on this topic, the governor requested that they come up with a plan to take half this money away from Canajoharie over a 5-year period. And they came up with a plan. Only the legislature stopped it. I don't know if they'll do it again. But the thing is, I receive calls about every month from some school district. It was usually like a small city or a bigger city, Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, those guys. And they say, look, we're destitute over here. Why are they paying Canajoharie and districts like Canajoharie to receive our soul? Why are they doing it? We want that money. We'll hire you to help us get that money. But I work for districts like yours because I was a superintendent in districts like yours. So I've refused everything. But there's competition. There's people who want your money. And they're organized. So it's going to be a real interesting couple of years. If we start looking across the page, you'll see there's zeros. That's because there's nothing in the law that says that Canajoharie should get another penny of this money. So as costs go up, diesel fuel goes up, cost of buses go up, cost of educating kids go up, labor goes up, health insurance goes up, Social Security goes up. A major source of your revenue is frozen. To me, that would be a major problem, without a doubt. It's easy to see that. Now, the next thing to keep in mind is that we don't know where it's going. So in my projections, I'm not going to add any money there because I don't want to give you a false hope it's going to show up because there's people trying to take it away from you. So even if you got 2%, the 222,000 instead of 111 isn't going to save anybody's bacon. Then there's another group of aid called expense-driven aids. So I've got transportation aid, with or without summer school, the first two, building aid, BOCES aid, public excess cost, high cost, and private excess cost aid. Let's go through them. So you've got a little summer school program, you're getting a whopping, what, $3,000 in aid. Boy, that ought to pay for something. Okay? The next one is you get some transportation aid, and you'll see it's gone up and down over the years. That's because it's dependent on a whole bunch of things. What size bus you buy, how much the bus costs, how many repairs you have to the bus, how many miles the bus went, how many students that were within 1.5 miles of school run the bus. That's what they call allowable pupil miles. You can transport everybody you want, but that doesn't mean you're going to age them. So the point is that this vacillates up and down based on different variables. And it's only a partial reimbursement. Your reimbursement, by the way, is very high, 90%. Which means the district has its thinking cap on and is doing very well getting reimbursements. They are really smart, so that's good. The next one is building aid, and you'll see the building aid has gone up and down. Now, why would it go down here over these years? That's because building aid, it comes in over a 15-year period, and it's because it matches your debt service. So when you do a capital project, you borrow money for 15 years, they try and match the aid to the amount of debt service, interest, and principal. Again, it's only a partial reimbursement. You get about 90%, which is very, very good. But this is where old debt has fallen off, and therefore the aid has fallen off. Now, the capital project you're in right now, you'll see the aid starting to bump up here, and then it'll bump up here again when that capital project is done. Aid cannot be provided to a school district for a capital project until 18 months after the commissioner's approval date of the project, which is usually 6 months to a year after the voter approval. So in other words, you pay for the whole project and you're waiting for the aid, your first aid payment. So you need to front the money. But that's a good sign there. Also, we've got BOCES aid. Now, what's BOCES aid? Now, a lot of kids go to career technical education programs at BOCES, but you can also buy technologies from BOCES and help get this aid, in other words, state support. But you can also get staff development. There's a ton of services BOCES offer. And the reason there is a BOCES, Board of Cooperative Educational Services, is because you could never offer all this stuff yourself. I mean, it would be literally impossible. They figured that out in 1948. when they created BOCES. And it's still thriving today. And I believe it's going to go up a little bit because the aid ratio is going up. But it depends on how many kids you send and don't send. Every year is a big factor. But you don't get aid for special needs kids from BOCES, even if you send them to BOCES. That's because the aid for special needs kids, as I mentioned earlier, is in foundation aid, but it's also in these last two. Public excess cost high aid. Here you're getting $399,000 for private placements. You're probably spending $450,000 to get the $400,000. You understand what I'm getting at? It's only a partial reimbursement. This could be like school for the deaf, school for the blind, things like this. Kids in unbelievably special programs that are private. The public ones, this could be for kids in BOCES and so on. The law says that the school district must educate all children to age 22. Okay? The aid only goes to age 21. Special needs programs could easily be 100, 150, 200,000, 250 a pop. Some are actually residential. The child is your resident, they're your responsibility. Okay? So you can see this is going to be an issue going forward. Next, we got software, library, textbook, and hardware aid. And you'll see piles of red numbers. And the reason there's a pile of red numbers is that's because you're going to lose aid. And that's because your enrollment is declining. Okay? So every time your enrollment declines, you lose aid in those categories because they're paid per student. That's generally how it works. And I don't see any hope in sight. Now, luckily, they're not big dollar value aid categories, and you're not losing your shirt. But you know it does add up. So let me just give you an example. So if I'm looking over here, and I add these up, and I say, okay, that's about $3,000 or somewhere around there. This is 3, this would become 6, this would become 9, this would become 1.2 thousand, which would be $1,200, this would be 15,000, excuse me. So what happens is over time, it tends to add up. You can buy a lot of $15,000 in school. And then we've got universal pre-K, universal kindergarten. They're trying to get this to be a mandate in 28, 29. I don't know if you're aware of this, but prepare yourself for a shock. They're going to mandate universal pre-K, but kindergarten is not mandated. So I guess we're going to give the kids a year, one of those year-off things. So what's going to happen here, though, but this money is in orange, because this does not support your budget. This goes into a separate fund. It's required to go into a separate fund for this program. So in other words, this isn't supporting the K through 12 program that you have. So what happens is the governor tends to like to add everything up and call it total aid, even if you get it or you don't get it. But the truth of it is, I don't count UPK because it's not running your school district. Right now, you don't have to have a UPK program if you don't want to, but 2029, you're going to have them, whether you like it or not. So that'll be the problem. The problem with smaller schools with UPK programs is the number of sections. Every section you have, or every class, think of it that way, must have a teacher, must have an aide, it must be all day. Okay, or you get no aid. Now, if you have, say, 34 kids show up, there would be 2 sections of 17. But if you have 48 show up, that would be 3 sections. The aid may not cover it. Does everyone understand what I'm talking about? So there's a certain breaking point here. So that's the aid picture for Canajoharie. Let's do Fort Plain. I'm not going to go into details much because I already explained how this all works, and you can all read, so we're good to go. Here we go. Foundation aid. You see the same 0%. See the 0%? Same first year. See it? To the second year. Next, they got 2% next. You know why? Because the legislature passed a law saying every school district that year could get no less than 2%. That's how they got the 2%. Okay, and then they're going to get 1% too, a whopping $109,000. And nothing from then on. Right? So that's what we're worried about. Now, they have high tax aid there in Fort Plain. I don't know if you're aware of this. High tax aid was created in 2008. And it was created so badly that it was an uproar that year about the distribution and creation of that formula. It was so bad that the legislature did not want to admit that they really screwed this up. So you know what they did? They passed a law saying, you know, every year we're just going to agree that it's the same amount, and we're not going to run the formula. So there's no evidence that Fort Plain now would be eligible for this if this was to be updated. But they're going to keep it going because the legislature doesn't want to take money away. Then we have the expense driven aids going down the page and so on. just like yours, but you can see the ups and flows going up and down just like that. And you can see in the building aid, you're going to have a big increase in the 28-29 year. That's because of their capital project, because you got to keep infrastructure up. No matter what you can have one class in here, but you got to have the roof so it doesn't leak. You got to have the water so it's clean. You got to have the heat so it works. You got to have everything working. You got to use all these codes. And you can see they're losing a lot of money over here too, because their enrollment is dropping as well. They are $389,000 in safe harmless, as you can see here, which some people would like to take away from Fort Plain. So I hate to say this, but after all this analysis, they're basically in terms of state aid in the same boat. And it isn't looking good. It isn't looking good at all. So let's do some demographics. Let's talk about Canajoharie. In that foundation aid formula, they have a whole bunch of things that are calculated. For instance, if we go over here to the top left-hand corner, you'll see it says TAFCU, Total Aidable Foundation Pupil Units, they call it in foundation aid. We used to call them children. That's what they're called now. Total Aidable Foundation Pupil Units. So what it is, though, it's a little different count. Remember I told you about the special needs and the general ed? In this count, instead of just looking at how many kids you have, I think they rightfully start looking at the kids and call it a weighted average, which means like a general ed kid would be counted as one kid, no special needs there, but a special needs kid would be counted as 1.41. So they count more. Where did the 1.41 come from? Anybody know? I don't either. No one knows. Someone made it up back in 1932 or something, but whatever it is, that's our number. So what happens is you'll see that Canajoharie is losing these kids, and since the beginning of foundation aid, has lost actually 338 kids, which is enough loss for another school district. They had 338 kids. So we almost lost a school district's worth of kids here. So the state looks at those two sets of metrics and says, why in the world would we send any more money to Canajoharie? Well, what the state doesn't understand is, one less kid in every classroom does not equate to any efficiency or any economy of scale. If you're used to driving around 6 kids to a soccer game and one kid is sick, how much gas do you save? So what happens is they really don't understand how this works. So what happens is your share, state sharing ratio, SSR, of foundation aid is not moving very far. Now this one's going to come as a shocker to most of the people in the audience. This formula is only 40 pages long, so I'm only trying to break apart the most essential parts. So what happens is there's a part called the expected local contribution. And a lot of the data comes from the Office of Real Property Tax Services, which is the official entity in New York State for all property values. They know how much everybody's property is worth. Now, we're not talking about assessed values and equalization rates, we're talking about the full value of the property. So if you had a $100,000 assessment, your equalization rate was 50%, you're sitting at a $200,000 property. I mean, that's the math. It's actually that simple. Okay? All they're interested in is what's the full value, the actual value of the property. And what they do is they look at the property and they start trying to figure out whether or not the property is increasing in terms of its ability to pay. Let me give you a quick example. So I'm going to start my silly story segment. Here we go. It starts like this. It's Thursday night at Rick Tenz's house. 4 guys come over to play poker because they know he's a loser. They know they can make money off of Rick because he's a terrible poker player. So the 4 guys and I throw $1 into the kitty. So there's $5 in the kitty. That's how much we can collect if we win. That is because of the number of players. If Mr. 6 shows up before we start shuffling the cards, we don't take money out of the kitty, do we? No. We ask Mr. 6 to put his dollar in the kitty. And therefore now the kitty is bigger. Could be collected bigger because there's more players. What they're looking at for your 2 districts, in this case it's Canajoharie, is are there more players in your district? And the answer is yes. They're using a 3-year average starting 5 years ago. So they're saying, no, there's a new mini mart in the district, there's a new Dollar General. In fact, there's almost one on every block in most districts. Okay, there's a couple new 3-bedroom ranches, somebody built a new bar, there's a couple new garages, new gas station. So what there is there's more players. So your tax base is growing. And so what the state says is, well, we were going to give you a lot of money for a per kid, But last year, we just subtracted from the amount we're going to give you $4,600 based on your property values, but now we're going to subtract $5,200 from the amount we're going to give you because there's more employers in Canajoharie over the last 5 years, and therefore you have a greater ability to pay. Because the question this calculation answers is, what is the community's responsibility to the education rather than just us, the state? That's what they're trying to answer. And they think you should be paying 13.3% more. So they subtract it from the amount I did. That's one of the reasons you're in the hole. Then they looked at your community poverty. It's called small area and community poverty estimate, technical term. And the number is 0.18. That means you don't have a lot of poverty. You have some, but not a lot. Then we looked at your economically disadvantaged, which would be families that are on the SNAP program, food stamps, or the heat program for the heating season, that type of thing. And your number is 0.52. And actually, that's pretty good. That's actually pretty up there, pretty good. So they compared you and they call you a high-need district. So this number should say you should get more aid. This number says you should get less aid. This number says you should definitely get less aid. You see what's happening in the formula? So they're comparing all the parts. Then we come down here to pupil needs index, which is really English language learners. It would be the impoverished kids and so on. This would say that you should get more aid. What they're saying is, yeah, we've got a pocket of poverty here in Canajoharie, and we should probably pay more aid if you hadn't lost 338 kids. So that's how the formula works. The next one is the tax-based growth factor, 1.063. When that number gets above 1.005, that means the tax base is definitely growing, and that number comes from a separate entity called the Comptroller's Office. So the Comptroller on their website says, taxpayers, don't confuse this number with assessed values and equalization rates. If you have a real, this has nothing to do with it. There's more to tax in Canajoharie. If you don't want to collect it, that's your problem. But you know what? This is a multiplier in the tax cap. It pushes the tax cap up. The question is, will the district collect the tax cap? Then you've got 100 square miles in this district, and of course you are aware of the climate. So you know what the climate's like and the topography and everything else. To me, the reason I put this in here is to show you, can you imagine turning your entire fleet over to zero-emission buses and covering 100 square miles? What happens if we get all these kids to school in the first group and we have to have an emergency drill and send them all home? I got news for you, stay in school. This would cost a fortune. So one of the things that I would advise you to do as citizens is, I'd be on the phone tonight with your legislator and just call and leave a message. Say, move that zero-emission bus mandate back 10 years, because we can't afford it, it's stupid. Now, I have hybrid cars sitting out in their parking lot, so I'm not opposed to clean energy. But we just can't afford this. And nobody can get us all the power. You'd have to retrofit your entire bus routes that only plug-ins could work. Can you imagine the cost of this? And I'm sure everybody would be willing to pay that. So you have basically building aid ratios over here, 90%, very good. Transportation, 90. You've got high cost, 74. These numbers are actually pretty good. These are what's helping you keep you afloat so far, if it wasn't for the foundation aid falling apart. Your combined wealth ratio are below average wealth districts in the state of New York, which you would think you would get more aid for. Your property and income value are pretty below average. But because of the loss of the students, no. So in summary, they want to give you, this year $11,120,000, next year $11,231,000. 111,000 more next year. 1%, you're still in the drain 423. You would need to find 36 kids to get $11,000 more. And you got by June 30th to get it all. So I don't see you getting out of this. It's just, you're not going to get out. Okay. How about Fort Plain? Very, very similar, except Fort Plain's had an increase in special needs kids over the last year, but they've lost more kids, 463. So that's denying them the aid. And all the rest of their numbers are pretty much like yours. Local contribution going up about 10.5% here. Not much poverty. There's a pocket of poverty here, high needs. Property values below state average. Tax-based growth factor above the sacred number, 1.005. So the state's saying, looking at these two numbers, you guys ought to tax them more. If you don't want to, then that's your problem. Don't ask us for more money. 60 square miles, and it got similar numbers here. So you were very similar and almost in the same boat. So I don't see either one of you being saved by state aid or the state at all, other than through a possible reorganization in terms of getting a huge bulk of money. Now, the caveats, of course, are this, that I'm just going to point out a couple. State aid is a major source of revenue for both districts, 65% for Canajoharie, 70% for Fort Plain. Foundation aid of that amount, 71% Canajoharie, 67% for Fort Plain. Taxes make up 32% and 26% respectively. So what's happened is you cannot change these numbers. All the district can do is ask people to change that number. And if people grant permission, then they do it. If people say no, then they don't. And therefore, less money in. So you're safe, harmless, and I think I've gone over this. The big problems now we're going to start tackling right now, though, is the cost of salaries, health insurance, pensions, bus and transportations, the cost of maintenance, utilities, and other accoutrements for your education program. So let's start tearing apart where the money is in each district. So this is analysis of the reserves of Canajoharie. So let me go through how reserves work. So you have no workers' compensation reserve, nor do you need one because you're not self-funded, you're actually not allowed to have it. So you don't have any money in there, and that's good. You've got an unemployment insurance reserve of $238,000. And of course, as you remember, during the last recession, the federal government extended unemployment coverage, and all the school districts had to pay all the extra. I don't know if you were aware of that, but that's helped to deplete some of our reserve. The other thing, too, that they've got that's really smart, shows very good planning on the part of this district, Canajoharie, is the reserve for ERS and TRS. Now, the pension systems are very, very interesting. What happens is the pension system gets its money from two ways. One is the stock market, and the other is the school district. Those are the two sources of funds for the retirement systems for school districts. What they do is they take a look at what they call actuarial tables. So they try to determine basically how much money the pension system will have to pay out. And if the stock market can cover it, then the school districts really don't get much of a burden. But when the stock market doesn't cover it, the school districts get the burden because they have to pay the difference. Now, when I started teaching, which was many, many, many years ago, as I mentioned, you heard schooling, I think, at that point, what actually was going on here was basically you need $30,000 a year, maybe. My first year, by the way, I made $5,500 as a teacher, $5,500. I don't know what I did with all the money, but apparently I've had great work. The point is that it's a different world out there. Now we have to track teachers. I think at that time, obviously, we were hard out, and that's all hard. But the key thing is this. Now these systems, people are working longer. They're making more money, and they're living healthier, and they last longer after retirement. Therefore, it's putting pressure on the costs of these pension systems. We're going to find some other things. So that actually shows great planning. Property, liability, insurance reserve, or tax certiorari reserves, no need for the district to actually have them, and they don't have them, so there's no problem there. The next one's reserve for employee benefit accrued liability, $51,000 in there. What is this used for? This is used for unused sick person on vacation days that have to be paid to an employee when they leave the district if the budget doesn't have enough money. $51,000 is more and more than reasonable. The next one down here is capital reserves. The district has a plethora of capital reserves, which I think is fantastic. I wish all my clients had a portfolio like this. But the key thing is it looks like a lot of money, but it doesn't last long, and I can prove it to you. You'll notice for this current capital project, we just evaporated this entire capital reserve. A capital reserve is a reserve that is voted on by the voters, approved by the voters, and you have to tell the voters what you're going to use it for, capital project. You have to tell them how long it's going to be lasting, 10 years. You have to tell them the year it starts, 2017, and the maximum amount that can be deposited in it, $2.5 million. But already, even though this is a great plan, we've just wiped out this reserve in this last capital project. We also have another one for another 10-year for 2020. It'll start in 2023, and it's maxed out. We can't deposit any more in it for a future capital project. The question I would have is, that sounds like a great plan. But how do you know you're going to be able to do the capital project? I said, well, we have the money in the reserve. My question is a little more pointed. How do you know you won't need that reserve to run the school district every day and not be able to do the capital project? And that's one of the things we're going to test. Then there's other reserves down here. For instance, you can see that there's a reserve that could be a reserve for equipment right here, and we've actually used that up. Remember I said to you, the district is starting to use up its reserves. You see it right. Then what we've got is reserve for equipment, like furniture, classroom furniture. Now this is a brilliant idea, because what happens is, during a capital project, if you try and buy furniture, classroom desks, let's say cafeteria tables, chairs, things like that, it is not aid eligible. In other words, there's no state support to help you pay for it. And then what happens is you usually have to amortize it for 15 years, so the debt lasts longer than the furniture. So the district wisely created this so that during a future capital project, we're going to have enough money to keep putting more money in there. I'm going to give you a preview of coming attraction scenes, so will be absolutely not. So then what's going to happen is, there it is. You can see the fund balance being built up, and what helped us and saved us a lot was the COVID federal grants. That's what saved a lot of districts. And that's what helped you build these reserves. It was smart. But now we've got this capital project, so we can see it starting to ebb. And over time, some of these, I believe, if not all of these, are going to go away. You will need them to run the school district. You also have some money in the 4% allowance. And what I would suggest the district do is take this $1.8 million and put it up here to bolster the reserve. So no harm done there. So 4% will be, for the purpose of my study, will be up in the reserves. Only 4% will leave in cash. So let's go to Fort Plain. We've got something similar. I have to go through it in detail. You can see they've got some in workers' comp. They've got a lot more in unemployment. They've got ERS and TRS really covered very well. That looks really good. They have no need for property and liability insurance or reserve for tax insurance either. They have a significant amount in employee benefit accrued liability. If I was a financial advisor, I'd say, okay, I would put more in there. I would actually find other purposes for the money. But they have a nice capital reserve for a capital project, but they only have one capital reserve. So if I could buy a bus out of the capital reserve, I could buy it cash. Understand? I wouldn't have to amortize it, or got to get a loan for 5 years for the bus. I could buy it cash. I can save everybody money. So we wish that they actually had more diversified capital reserves. They have a reserve for repair. The problem with the reserve for repair, unfortunately, is that repairs are not state supported. In other words, that's on their own dime. You can see their reserves are also growing over time, and they've used up some of their reserves. You can see this number here is less than that number, so they've used some of them. And they actually have a plan to buy buses right here out of the reserve, out of their reserve. So they're going to try and use it because this capital project and bus reserve can be used for capital project and buses. And if you'll notice, I've actually subtracted the buses from it, so they're going to keep tapping their reserves. So now what we're doing is I'm going to give you two demonstrations that both districts are using their savings accounts. Okay? So that takes care of it. They also have 4% limit, and they also have what's called a debt service fund to offset debt, and I think that can be used for future capital project if the district stays afloat that long. So let's go through a scenario. Let's show you how a budget works. So what we're going to do is we're going to have an actual annual tax increase for school district. So what I'm going to do is we're going to come up with a hypothetical. In other words, what we're going to do is we're going to test a couple of assumptions. So we're going to make a scientific experiment out of this in real life. So let's just say the district did collect 1.53% last year, and this year they're going to 2.5% tax increase. And for the remainder of the 5 years, 26, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they're going to go 2%. Now that doesn't mean the tax cap comes up 2%. That's why I got this here. But what it does mean, if we were to do 2% a year after this year, would there be enough revenue to keep the district afloat? That's what I'm going to test in front of you right now. So basically what would happen is taxes would move just like this, and they would increase about $900,000 for this district. The first year they'd move up $205,000. The pilot agreements here are very small, so they're going to move at a really fairly different rate. But I took the state aid from the state aid page I showed you, and I stuck it right in here. And you can see the state aid move up and down. For instance, right here, you can see that building aid coming into fruition for Canajoharie. See it right here? There's what it's showing up. So you're going to see a little increase there. Transportation aid, not so much because it's on a downward spiral now. The federal Medicaid aid has been right-sized to $40,000, which is a little more accurate. And then what we've got is other revenues, which could be interest earnings, miscellaneous sales, scrap, use of money, things like that. And then what we have down here at the bottom is an overall revenue picture. So technically the revenues will go up $2.28 million in the 5-year period. So that's really pretty simple. The revenue side is the easy side. Let's look at the expense side. So let's just tear the budget apart. This is the Canajoharie budget. We're going to tear it apart. It's divided into different parts. Let's do the general support part first. What is general support in a budget? General support would be the superintendent's office and everybody working in it. It would also be the business office and everybody working in it. So it's like payroll, accounts payable, the treasurer, things like that, right? Business officials, things like that. So, but the biggest part isn't those folks. The biggest part of the school districts of the salaries is actually operations, maintenance, buildings, cleaners, custodians, maintenance mechanics, groundskeepers, anybody who works in the custodial tech area, secretaries, all those people that work in central office are up in the salaries too. Now, in current contractual obligations, we expect that this $1.375 million budgeted for 26, that's the year we're in now, 25-26, will really increase to $1.6 million, about $269,000. So that's how much that's going up. The other category, what's in other? The other category would be like OC's administrative costs, but it's also people like electricity, utilities. Plus it's all the equipment, supplies, and materials for central office, as well as all the supplies, materials, and equipment for operations, buildings, and grounds, like floor scrubbers, mops, wax, right, and all the, whatever else they use. So it's going from about 2.2 million to about almost 6, about $368,000 up, about 16.6% over 5 years. The next one, of course, is instruction. You notice the salaries are the biggest number on the page, and they're supposed to be, because those are the people working with children every day. Remember, it's the mission of the school district. It's people working with people. We don't have a lot of machines in here. We have people working with people. So obviously the salaries would be the biggest thing. Now, if you take a look at this, if you take a look at it, now who's in this people? It starts off with the principals are in there, guidance counselors, general ed teachers, special ed teachers. If your school pays for school psychologists, they're in there. They pay for the behavioral specialists, they're in there. Class advisors in there, the nurses in there, the guidance counselors are in there, the librarians in there, the class advisors are in there, the coaches are in there. Everybody understand what I'm getting at? It's a people business. Schools are just plain people working with other people. Okay? Really kind of simple. It's going to be moving from about 8.9 million to about 11 million, almost 1. About $2.1 million increase. Now keep in mind, when you talk about math, I don't know how many of those remember math classes, there's something called the law of big numbers. For instance, if I get $10 an hour and I get a 5% raise, I'll get less of a raise than if I had made $20 an hour and I got a 5% raise. I mean, this is like 4th or 5th grade math. So the bigger the number, even though the percentage increase may be small, the greater the growth in the number, because it's the biggest number. Now we get to other. What's in other? This is all the kids you send to BOCES in terms of special ed, general ed, things like this. But it's also the textbooks, the supplies, the materials that you buy for classes, the papers, the copies. It's the art supplies, right? It's the books. It's everything they use basically for instruction. So there's a lot in other. It's going from about 3.4 million to about 4.2 million, about 819,000 up. Now let's pause for a second here. So you'll notice here, I've got percentages up and down the page. Now a lot of people like to see the percentage. So I say, what percent increase is that? What percent increase is that? Well, I put them in there so nobody will ask me that, okay? But let me show you how silly it is, and why you should never ask that. Let me give you an example. This number went up $269,000, which is almost 20%. This number went up 2.2 million at 9%. You don't spend percent, you spend money. So the percents are there if anybody wants to see them, but they're useless. Okay, so focus on the money. Now I'm going to bring up an extremely important point right now. So if you haven't listened to anything so far, this would be worth it. I'm going to add this 2.16 million to this 1.89. And I'm going to get about $3 million. How about you, right? Those two lines going up are greater than all of your revenues going up. Did you ever see that? 6th grade math. Right there. So what happens is, you're in big trouble. It's that simple. But let's keep going. Look at salaries, transportation. Moved from about 835 to about 1,019,000, 184 up. Supplies, this is the headlights, the light bulbs, the tires, the brakes, the diesel fuel. 812 to 952, 140. Here's your community service types of things that you do in your district. And then we come to the benefits. 5 benefits: retirement pension, Social Security, workers' comp, health, and then miscellaneous other things like sick days and buyouts and so on. The biggest number on the page for this one, of course, is health insurance. And health insurance is killing everybody in almost New York State. Probably you too. I don't know if you're aware, but the feds have actually cut some reimbursements for Medicaid reimbursement. So the big problem here is that we're all going to be suffering. Remember during COVID, only a few people went to the doctor. The ones who usually had COVID. Almost no one else, statistically, went to the doctor during COVID. Few people, yes, hardly anyone. But after COVID, everybody got their knees replaced, their hips replaced, their teeth fixed, new glasses, they had their hair removed, their hair put on their head, they got a hearing aid, they got their elbow fixed, they had a tear in their shoulder, and many of them went to the doctor and found out they were terminal with something else, or they were sick some other way, and they had colonoscopies, and endoscopies, and all the scoscopies they had. So what happens is all these health insurance consortia out of the blue got hit with all these bills. And it's crushed these health insurance consortia across the state, all over the place. So the costs are increasing rapidly. This one is increasing right there, about almost $1.5 million in 5 years. Right there. Then we have your debt service, which is moving along. You can see it increasing because there's your capital project coming into fruition. Remember, the aid went up, so did your cost. There's a partial reimbursement. So if we look at the bottom line, I'm looking at $6.9 million increase in expenses compared to $2.3 million in new revenue. So all those reserves I showed you, we're going to be using. The difference between these two is not going to cover other reserves. So let's make it easy. I put the revenues on the top, and I put the expenses on the bottom. You can see what's going on. $78,000 less revenue coming in 27 than there was in 26, but $85,000 more costs. $205,000 more revenue coming in, $1.1 million more costs. $214 more revenue coming in, $2.8 million more costs. You can see it. Remember, the state aid isn't moving. Your major source, your major check, your major paycheck isn't moving. But your utilities continue to climb, cost of gas for your home, right? Cost of power, your hot water tank, whatever you're doing, it's costing more. So let's keep going. Now, the fund balance is important. This district penny pinched its way through and had $3.7 million left in 2025. But what happened was, in 2026, the budget's so tight this year, we're only going to have $524,000 left. We went through all the payrolls, all the bills for this year. We went through them all. Find out how much would be left. We are eating our own fund balances because we're using our own money to balance our own budget. So what happens here is, next year there'll be even less because the budget is even tighter. And we're going to use some money for the capital reserve. This is the 4% of expenses the district is allowed to have. So if I look at the 26-27 year, next year, I see $409,000 left over in the budget and $1,092,000 in the 4%, which we're allowed to have in cash for emergencies. This is called cash flow. This number is very important. You know why? Because when I add these two numbers together, I get a very important number. I get about $1.5 million. So here's what happens in a school district. July 1, the business office starts sending out POs, buying everything for the school year. At the same time, they're paying still everybody's health insurance. They're paying liability insurance. They're topping off diesel fuel at the bus garage. You understand what I'm paying? They're paying everybody that's working, all the cleaners, all the custodians. How much tax money revenue has come in the month of July? None. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to launch a $27 million budget with $1.5 million. The business office is sweating and praying nobody sends them an invoice that won't need to be paid until tax day. During the summer, in August, September, and October, there is a state aid check that comes in. But you know what the state does with that state aid check? From that check, they subtract the pension costs. Remember the $3 million I just showed you? They subtract that $3 million from the whole year from that, for those 3 checks. So the district ends up with very little money. It's still no tax money until we get into September. Then what we find out is last week in August, kids show up maybe for sports, teachers check their rooms and stuff like that. Principals have been working all summer, things like this. And all of a sudden, we have staff development days, and the kids start arriving the first week of September. Now we have every bus running, we're burning every piece of diesel fuel we got, we're running all the buses, everybody in the district is working. The teachers are teaching, the guidance counselors are guiding, the nurses are nursing, the librarians are librarianing, or whatever they do. So what happens is everybody's busy and the money's still flying out the door. How much tax money do we have first week of September? Hardly anything. Usually get by the end of September. So we're floating this district on 1.5 million. My warning to the district is they cannot cut their fund balances in their budget anymore. They won't be able to operate. They'll be calling their financial advisor, which I am not the person, but they will call their financial advisor and saying, we have to go out on the market and borrow money to pay payroll, to pay bills. And then what will happen is your costs will escalate because they'll be charged to borrow the money and there'll be an interest payment because you borrow money. In other words, you're going to get a payday loan, which would be bad. It's going to drop your credit rating so that any future borrowing you do, you're going to pay a higher rate. It would be a disaster. Then what happens is the biggest state aid check finally does arrive in the school district for the school year. And it occurs in the month of March. Deep into the school. They just got it last month. But they've had to pay for everything by themselves, just with the tax money and their savings account. Now let's take a look at all the money they've got. So what we've got over here is we have what they call assigned appropriate fund balance. What is this number? You'll see this is 824, the number over here diagonally 824. What is this number? I've recalculated everything starting from 26. This is, look at this is the revenue picture, 25.4 million. The expense picture is 26 million. The difference is 661,000. The difference here, this is 25.3 million, this is 26.1. The difference is 824. The district must promise that they will, if they spend out the budget through no fault of their own, could be a whole bunch of factors, that they will run and rate their reserves by $824,000. Of course, you have to have $824,000 rated, so that's going to be important as we do this. The second thing that occurs is I'm taking that money that's above the 4% limit and I'm moving it so that it's not there, I'm putting it into reserves. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep looking at the difference between the budgeted amount of revenues compared to the budgeted amount of expenses, so I know how much money I have to put in this, they call assigned fund balance. In other words, I have to keep it in advance, I have to keep it in my savings account no matter what. Then what I start doing is I start looking at the differences each year between these budgets. And I know that we're going to have 409,000. The problem is if I need 824,000 to balance my budget, and at the end of the year I only have 409, I'm actually going to start using some of my own money. I'm going to have to then decrease my fund balances and decrease my reserves. Because what happens is you've actually used some of your own money to operate the school year. And if we just keep going, you'll see things just plain get worse. The distance by the time we get over here to 2030, 31, you will need almost $5.3 million to balance your budget, and you will have no money. Matter of fact, you'll have a deficit. I've wiped out all of your reserves. I've wiped out all of your cash. Your district will be belly up. End of story. So what's actually happened here is you can see where the trouble starts right here. This number is getting close to this number. Here's your total fund balance, all the money you've got in the world, and this is how much you need to balance next year's budget. By the time we get to the year 2930, you need $4 million to balance the budget, and all the money in the world you have is $2.9 million. It's curved. Now, there's never been a school district in the state of New York that went bankrupt. Never. That commissioner I mentioned, remember I showed you the 21 things going to be riding in here on a white horse. We replace the board and start taxing you for all your debt service no matter what. Until all your debt's paid. There'll be real problems here. They can defy the tax act, there's a lot of things they can happen. So there's going to be real issues. The truth of it is, this district is not going to make it to 2930. So you're not going to make it. For Your revenue curve on the top, and you can see the big bump in the revenue curve is because of the building aid. You can see it right there. Here's your expenditure graph. Look at this thing. Look at that. Here's them together. Your expenditures are outstripping your revenue. You don't have enough money. Those reserves you think you get a lot of money in, it's not going to be enough. Because your expenses are escalating much faster than your revenues. If expenses are moving, say, utilities at 11 or 12%, and pensions are going up 6%, and salaries are going up, say, 3%, how can you have raised taxes only 2%? It's just mathematically impossible. So that's Canajoharie for you. When you get all your money and more. So let's take a look at Canajoharie's tax cap. What I did is I actually calculated the tax cap from 12/13 to the present day, 26/27. And the data comes from the Office of the Comptroller, so it's official data from New York State. And this is your tax cap. So let me explain to you how the tax cap works. So let me just get over here. So you start off right there with where you left off. In other words, the first number in the tax cap is the amount the district collected the prior year. The next number is that tax-based growth factor I talked to you about earlier. You'll see it's 1.042. That means the tax base is growing. Notice there's an X next to it. It means you multiply the two numbers. Because under tax cap legislation, it's saying to the district, your tax base is growing, go get the money. People have a greater ability to pay. They may not want to pay, because in my entire career over 4 decades, nobody's been at one of my board meetings saying, please tax me more, I'm not paying you. Nobody's ever said that. Now, it's not maybe a willingness, but there's an ability. Then what they do is they put the pilots in there, because the controller wants to know how much you collect in pilots rather than taxes. Then this is the amount of what they call the capital exclusion. This is the district's share of any capital costs. For instance, a capital project, costs. And so what happens is you're supposed to collect the money for this. The district's supposed to collect the money for its capital project. So they add it together to collect it. And then they multiply it times the tax-based growth, or the allowable growth factor. And here you can see it's 1.02. This is where the 2% tax cap gets its name, 2% tax cap. It's not because the cap is 2%. It's because this number in these 8 steps can only be 2%. So if inflation is below 2, you use the number. So let's look at it over here. See, inflation that year in 14-15 was 1.46%. There it is there. Here it was 1.62. But over here, it was 4. But you can't go higher than 2 on that piece of the formula. That's where the 2% tax cap number comes from. And why do they multiply it? See an X. They multiply it because the government's saying in the legislation, if things cost more, you ought to be able to collect more. So we're multiplying it to drive your number up, okay, to help you survive. And then what happens is you take the pilot agreements for the next year and you subtract it because it will be paid separately. And then there's certain every year, it depends on what the finances are. Sometimes ERS is allowed to be collected or not, and a new tax cap exclusion. So in that year, 12-13, your tax cap was 3.7% in Canajoharie. It was 3.7. It wasn't 2. It wasn't even near 2. Okay? So what it says to you is this. You can collect $6.7 million, which is actually $239,000 more than the prior year, with only 50% of the voters saying yes plus one person. Well, 50% plus 1. And that's how it works. And you'll notice here it was 4.1, there was 1.5, 1.6, and it's because all of these numbers change. You can see them all change. But the interesting thing is, if I look across the numbers, I see a 0.008, big increase in tax base. I see another one right here, this is huge, big one, and one last year. So the state would point to this and say, if Canajoharie is going to grow, it's a self-inflicted injury because they're not collecting what they're allowed to collect. If people don't want to, then I guess they don't want the school district to survive either. It's not our fault. That's the way the state's looking at this. So how does the tax cap work when you don't follow the text? It's a very simple story. So the Board of Education, you guys are all going to work for me Monday through Friday next week. You can do a project for me. And if you do a good job on a project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you $100 a day, each, all board members. So you think, well, that's a pretty good deal. You're going to go work on a project. And then you leave and start working on it. And here's what I'm thinking to myself. I'm a taxpayer businessman. And I start thinking to myself, why did I promise $100? I wish I had said something smaller. because I don't want to really part with anybody. Just like a normal person doesn't want to just give up money. So you come back on Monday and you say, look, here's our project. How are you doing? I said, listen, I'm having a rough week. You know, I have these apartment buildings, we've got problems with electric and plumbing and all, it's costing a fortune. I'm having a rough week financially, but I am a nice guy and I want to help you. So let me see what you've done. And I look at your project and I say, gee, didn't you get the memo? You didn't get anything right here. I mean, this doesn't look right at all. But I'm a nice guy. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you each $90 for today, Monday. So you were short $10 on Monday compared to what you could have had. And I know this because I have $10 from each of you actually in my pocket. Tuesday comes along and you work harder to gain my favor. That's what people do. And I'm thinking, this is working out great. So I give you the same sad story on Tuesday, tell you I'm a nice guy, and then I give you $10 on Tuesday. So you were short $10 on Tuesday. But actually, you are short $20 so far for the week. And I know this because I have $20 from each of you in my pocket. So let's make the story short. We do the same thing every day Friday. Friday, I give you another $10 to you. So you're short $10 on Friday, but you're short $50 for the week. And I know this because I have your $50 each in my pocket that you could have had, but I have. So you see how it compounds. It only allows you $10, but you're out $50. Then I feel terrible about it. I say, listen, let me help you out. I'm going to give you a raise. I'm going to give you a 5% raise. So I want everybody to think about how much would the raise be? 5%. What you should be thinking right now is it 5% of the 90 or is it 5% of the 100? It's obviously 5% of the 90 because I never paid you the 100. I can't give you a raise except I did give it. So what's going to happen is I'm going to give you $4.50 more. So in other words, I'm taking you to your cleaners again, even though I look like I've helped you. Everybody see how that works? That's how the tax gap works. Let me show you. Here's what you actually do with the tax gap. You did not follow the tax gap in some years. And here's why. So I'm going to try and get over here. This will be a lot easier. This first year, you could have collected $6.7 million at 3.7%. The district decided to collect only 2.5, which means you didn't collect $77.894 million. So you were short $77.894 million. And I know that because the board and the school district didn't have it in their pocket. It was in everybody else's pocket. They kept the money. Now remember how this works. The first thing you do is the first number is where you left off. Well, it can't be the number you could have collected. It has to be the number you did collect. So you'll notice this number and this number are the same. So this number here is automatically $77,894 less than it would have been. So you're starting the next year losing another $77,000. Matter of fact, every one of these numbers is $77,894 less than what it could have been. It's right here. The next year, you could have collected 4.2%, but you only collected 2. So you didn't collect 146. In the same year, you still didn't collect the 77,894. So that year, you didn't collect 224. Everybody see what's happening here? This isn't rocket science. The next year, you did stay the cap. The next year, you stayed to the cap. The next year, you didn't even collect anything. You didn't collect nothing, no increase. Look, these 3 years, no increase in taxes. Apparently, you didn't have any increased costs. So then what happens is when you don't collect the taxes, we didn't collect them. We didn't collect this 15,000. We didn't collect this 106. We didn't collect this 164. So that means the next year is 164 less. It's also 106 less. It's also 15 less. It's also 146 less. And it's also $77,000 less. So if we look at the whole time, what we find over here is in these 14 years, the school district did not collect $9.797 million that it would have collected with 50% plus one person if they followed the tax cap. If they had collected it, we would not be at this meeting here tonight. But let's make it worse. This levy that you're going to levy for next year is actually $1.38 million less than it would have been if they stayed to the cap. So you're really $10,836,000 behind. I know this because it's not in the school district's pocket. If you have a mirror at home, you figure out where it is. So the key thing here is that's what happens. So, but there is something, the board was given an opportunity to collect it over again and over again, called the carryover. In other words, if you didn't collect it, that 106, how about taking another shot of it? They still didn't collect it. So even without the carryover, no matter how you figure it out, the best I can figure out is the minimum you're behind is $8.6 million. And if you had collected that, we would not be here today at all. In fact, we wouldn't be discussing anything. So now, let's do Fort Plain. So this should be easier. Now, Fort Plain tells me they want to increase taxes 1.25 a year. Okay, that's what they're going to do. But I think you want to know where this is going at that rate, right? I mean, you have to be a real scholar here. So I copied their state aid over, copied over their other revenues. There's their revenue. Their revenue is going up $1.88 million over this period of time. I look at their expenses, boom. Here we go, right there. And look at this. 1.88 in revenue, look at this. 2.3 million, just in those two categories, more than all their revenue. This isn't that hard. All you gotta do is dig up the numbers. And you can see this health insurance is gonna add to it. Now, I'm not trying to pick on these numbers, by the way, of teachers, or health insurance, or pensions. They're the biggest numbers, that's why I do it. For instance, if you look at economics, you have two credit cards, you own the same amount of money. Which you make a bigger payment to than you have to make a payment, the one with higher finance charge. Because of the bigger number. And that's what we're doing here. So technically speaking, I bring everything over for them, and they're going to be buying these buses. Here's their cash flow. They, on the other hand, will make it, but barely make it, right here, to 20, 30, 31. Look at, they got $8 million left. Guess what? Do you remember when I showed you the reserves? They got $8 million in reserves. Actually, a little less than that, more like 7.2 in reserves for capital projects and buses. In other words, they can make it as long as they don't do another capital project the rest of their life and they don't buy another bus. That money is going to be gone. If they do it, they'll be gone. So everybody's in big trouble. Here's their revenue curve. Here's their expense curve. Here's the two curves together. A couple dollar figure difference, but you're both in the exact same boat. And here's their tax cap if they had followed it. I figured it all out. Now these slides will be available on the websites in both districts, and these all at your leisure. I'm not going to belabor the point, but they didn't follow it either. They're behind about $19 million. That's including the carryover money they didn't collect, or $20.7 million if you count the difference in their levies. So at least $15 million. We wouldn't have done at this meeting. All you have to do is stick to the bill. That's all you have to do. You have to exceed it. You have to go above it. Just be happy. So what we've got is, it says here, however, the study said, projections indicate expenditures are growing faster rate than revenues, likelihood of budget deficits as early as next fiscal year. But of course, be true. It's not going to be next fiscal year. It'll be 2 years from now. But here's the lesson you have to learn. Unless you fix it right away, you won't be able to fix it. Silly example. My wife says, "Well, where are you going?" I said, "I'm down here in Canajoharie University." "Well, I hope you're happy. How are things?" I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Oh, he came over and said a shot." I said, "How much is it?" She says, $12.50. I said, "My God, honey, we don't got $950 in our savings account." She says, "Well, what are we going to do?" And I say, "I got an idea. Let's go out and have a lavish dinner and figure it out." So the choices you're up against is, you can't keep spending more money to solve a problem that you don't have any money for. That's how silly it is. It's the most practical idea here. So what's going to happen here, you can read this, but it's obvious that your revenue trajectories are not even close. Starting in 2 years to your revenue, your expenditures. So you're going to have to make significant changes. And you know what? You have nothing to cut. You can cut out all the paper clips, all the pencils, all the laptops, all the Chromebooks. You can take them all away from your own kids. It won't make a dent. You know it's going to have to go, right? You do understand it's going to have to go. It'll be people. In other words, we will eliminate the mission of the school district. It's clear that we've got problems here. The foundation of the state is not saving. The state has its own issues. Your reserves, your rainy day funds will not last long enough, no matter how much you have in there. If you have like a lot, triple in there, you might have a shot. Here's what I've calculated. Technically, if this year, if there's a budget that the district's going to offer you in Canajoharie, if you could just have a 15% tax increase, I could get you to only 20, 30, 31. And who wants that? Nobody. Nobody wants it. Now, you don't have to do that. I suggest that you've got $850,000 worth of staff and benefits. Like right now. Now, if you wait a year, which we're going to have to wait a year, that 15 will turn into 18% increase, and the cuts will probably closer to $1 million. Or we can't make it. Because we'll keep spending money, you understand what I'm getting at? Instead of saving money. Now, Fort Plain, a little different. Okay? I think what would happen in there, you'd be up 12% this year, and you'd have to cut $600,000. Both of them are very, very destructive to the education. Or to basically taxpayers who go, are you kidding me? No. And if they wait a year, theirs will easily be 15, and then 600,000 will turn into 800,000. You have to cut your expenses. In other words, we can't go out to dinner. What became a norm in the old days when I had money is now a luxury when I don't, even though I want to have it and do it, even if it's desirable. So programs are going to go right out the door. But there's more to this. You do get this reorganization aid that you can get if you do this. So that's the lure. The state is actually saying, well, we'll save you, but we're only going to do it one way. So this is the formula to do it. And right now, the formula's been updated based on updates of data to about $83,966,000. It would come in over basically a 14-year period. The first 5 years would be very large. Okay, you can see it, $8.8 million would come into the district, and it would drop really by 4% every year until the money was exhausted. So it should easily last, no doubt, 15 years minimum. So somebody can say, well, okay, but that's only 15 years. I don't know about you, but if somebody handed me money to make my life better for 15 years, it would seem like it would be, it's like, I would turn that down. I don't know, it's up to you. Or I can run my own life. So what I did is, this is what the state, so what I did is I put the state aid all together for all the districts, and look at the bump. 31 million. In other words, here we are putting both districts together, 31 to 41 to 40. In other words, now you can see how high the state aid is. It remains there for about the first 5 years. And it goes down by 4% a year. It's still a huge amount of money. The total is almost $84 million. I'm working with a neighboring district here. Actually, I work with 2 bridge districts. And our plan, that I'm working with, I'm an advisor, but on their plan, we expect to live easily on this money for 30 years. By proper revenues, savings, and so on. We're going to build reserves. We're going to start paying cash for things, no more interest payments. We're going to actually do better capital projects. We can get more done, right? We're going to make 95% aid, not 90% aid. So that's a big boost over a tens of millions of dollars project. So what I've done is I've just hypothetically gone through here, and I've said, okay, look, let's just take a look at it. Let's build up reserves. Let's get a technology reserve. Let's buy all that stuff cash. Never mind borrowing money. Let's get some capital construction. You can see, let's fill up that reserve. Let's use the money to buy the buses or equipment. 3 years ago, I bought an F-150 Ford truck for a school district for $34,000 on state contract. This year, I bought one for $74,000, same truck. I have another district who bought a $180,000 snowplow with a wing and a dump truck, so it could be used all year long. How much did it cost? $180,000 cash, not even in the budget. We use the money for it. So that's how you do it. You can buy equipment, vehicles, buses, everything you need to. No leasing, no interest costs, no borrowing costs, no nothing. You save money. You're using somebody else's money to save money. So if we put them together, here's the trajectory. And you can see this right now. There would be the revenue picture, 12.3. Here would be the expense picture, less than 12. And this is without any attrition. In
In other words, once you combine the districts over the next 5, 6, 7 years, you may find you don't need everybody, especially if enrollment continues to keep going down. You don't have to lay anybody off. They call it attrition. So if Rick's working for you, the question when Rick leaves is, do we need to replace Rick? Well, if Rick's the only physics teacher, the answer is yes. But if Rick is the 16th guidance counselor, maybe not. I'm making this up, but you get the drift. So the point would be is there could be savings along the way to decrease these rates of increase. That's what we're doing in the 2 districts I'm working in. And we've been doing it for years that way. Nobody gets hurt. Program stays robust. Now the program and the staff matches together. And everything just works out. Notice the difference when I get to the end game. I need $2 million to balance the budget. I'm sitting on $50 million in year 5. I'm going to be good in 10. I'm going to be good in 15. I'm going to be good in 20. You see the point. So there are ways to get this going. This would easily work. The key thing is you've got to keep in mind, you're going to use the building aid for a purpose, you're going to use the incentive aid. There's 3 things you do with money. You build a program, you save it, to buy cash with things, and just decrease your increasing costs, and you take care of tax relief at the same time. And the amount of all that is determined by the board. The problem you've got is with the capital projects, you can't do everything at once. If you read we're not going to go over it all now, but if you look at the study, there's a whole bunch of formulas for capital projects. And I've actually analyzed your capital project aid. Matter of fact, the study points out that even with the debt you have now, you're paying $222,000 because you have increased aid on your current debt. So there's no doubt about it. But you have what they call building condition surveys. You have them for each district. Right now, we've got a document from the architect that is required by state law to be filed with the commissioner that this district, right here, Canajoharie, needs a minimum $35,000, $300,000 worth of work. Fort Plain needs $37,900. Together, you need $73,000. How are you guys going to accomplish this? So this could easily be done. There's aid requirements. In other words, you can only spend so much a year. I checked out each one of the aid requirements for each of the districts from their financial advisors, and you will have no problem meeting these aid requirements. So I've already checked it all out. It will work fine. So that's good. What you got to do is you got to look at the state support, your building aid. You got to find out what's aidable. Everything's done per building. There's a whole list of things that have to be done. But this is the key. This is what makes it work right there. We get the kind of school district we want and that we deserve. We're going to get it. But 95% for 10 years. For one of my districts, we just finished our 3rd capital project in 10 years with the increase in aid. So we really made hay. The other thing too is that when the incentive aid goes away, fine. But did you know this incentive aid is going to last? There are kids who aren't even in pre-K yet that will benefit their entire school career at this point. Do you understand what I just said? Every year. So their brothers and sisters, their cousins, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, and your children. If you don't want it, don't take it. There it is. So it can be done. So the key thing is that we've done the best we can in doing this in summary. Try to examine these budgets. We try to tear apart the budgets. We examine the purchases, what you're going to buy, what you're not going to buy, what you need. We've looked at staff need. But you got to keep in mind, you want the best and brightest working with your children. That's what you want. This is an educational experience. By the way, this will be the only one that's protected. When they get into college, if you're a parent and something goes wrong in college, do not call it college. No one will answer the phone. You understand what I just said? This is the most protected environment a child will be in. So there's long-term expenditures, health insurance, pensions, I've been through everything. I'm not going to go through all this, but you can read this on the website. The key thing is the willingness to pay taxes is always a problem. But anybody who thinks you can have a tax cap moving more 2 or 3% in the face of the utility cost, the health insurance cost, the denial of the aid by the state to your districts, you're not being realistic. That's all I'd say. You can have whatever you want, but it's not going to work. You cannot spend more than your revenues, and you're going to at this rate. So we got to right size this. The last one down here, number 4, the federal grants are gone. The federal government has announced that all grants to school districts, except one thing else, title grants have been liquidated. You are on your own. Zero emission buses, I wouldn't waste another cent, a second even talking about it. Unless you come together, you won't get about it. This is going to be beautiful. And you're going to be in violation of the law, so it'll be interesting. When I say here that the budget trajectory, salaries, and benefits will overwhelm your finances, that's easy. Failure to act immediately and over the next few years will make it difficult to sustain your financial goals. If you wait too long, it will be too late. You will bleed out. That will be a financial turmoil for you. Foundation aid at 1% is not going to help you. So the state's not coming in. Cost reductions, they got to be big enough so you can keep your cash flow going. Remember, you got to watch that tax cap. You haven't been watching it before. We're going to have to watch it from now on. Because there's political and financial implications if you challenge it. If you go above the cap, and I think you're going to have to, maybe in a year or two, if you don't move too fast, if you don't move fast enough, you will need 60% vote to pass the budget. If the budget does not pass, the district is condemned to collect no more than it did in the prior year. That would be devastating. That would freeze your entire revenue budget. And that's it. Now, are there other options? Yes, there are. There are other options. You can tuition out the students. It won't get you any more aid because you are both so safe harmless. You can tuition out students back and forth if you want. But you have to have a room in both districts, right? And it would have to be general and special ed, so we aren't discriminating. You know, what about transporting them? What about their access to BOCES programs, special ed? What tuition costs would there be? What would impact on the sending district? Is there enough money to make it worthwhile? All these would have to be figured out. Certainly a possibility. Regionalization. What could be shared? What would be the cost benefit? Who benefits? For instance, many times you start off sharing teams. Okay, now that you've saved $3.62. Now, compared to the size of the budget you have. So the thing is, are there any downsides to this? There's power and control issues. Will it generate enough funds to stabilize your differences? I don't know. What does the future hold? It's actually up to you. You get a chance to choose your future. Remember, if you choose it, no rousing. Okay? So, board members, before I wrap this up, does the board have any questions? Because this is a report from the board. You don't do it in public. Board members, anything for me? Now remember, these gentlemen and your superintendents and business officials all have my cell numbers. They can call me with any questions. There's been a lot of data here today. There's no doubt about it. I wouldn't doubt it if you don't have any questions right now. I'm not going to press you to have questions, but I'm at your service if you need more information. We can back up all this stuff. There's no doubt about it. And all this has been reviewed by everyone, so I think ourselves. Okay? So thank you very much, everybody.
Any questions?
Good?
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Just to let everyone know, if you're not aware of it, the agenda, the next point on the agenda will be a presentation by two school superintendents, Vic Fitzgerald and Helen Cameron.
That's okay.
And after that, we'll have public comments on the floor. If anyone has anything to say, we ask you to keep your comments 5 minutes or less. And then we'll have the board on the stage and have some discussion about the questions that Mr. Tim raised and also what they have about the merger. So I just wanted to make sure you're all aware of our agenda. And so without any further ado, I will introduce Aaron and Fitzgerald.
That might be easier than this.
Okay.
Before we get started, we do want to recognize, and I know a lot of you are here with us tonight, who are either one of our development plan panel members or served on one of the focus teams. We ask you, could you just stand up and be recognized, please? We thank you for the time and effort and expertise in it. Okay, so now we're just going to very quickly talk about what did they do. And as we heard from Dr. Tiff, there's a lot to it. He was talking mostly about the financial aspect, but there's a lot to schooling. We're considering a merge, a district that's made up of 2 districts. There's a lot to consider. So we took this very complex idea and started with just breaking it down into chunks. And we had 5 different chunks that we called focus teams. Areas that they would focus in on, and these were all volunteers who were led by some volunteered, I guess, some by our administrators and a couple of teachers who very boldly said, I would like to step up and lead these conversations. The whole idea is to get input from a lot of people and do it in a way that we could bring it all together, synthesize it, and make some recommendations. And those recommendations would go to the boards, our existing boards now, but they'll get refined and then sent to a merged board should there be a merged district and a board of that merged district. These recommendations are how should we move forward, things to consider, and how we break down those particular areas. And then who are on the focus teams? These kinds of folks. We had parents and students and employees and board trustees. We also had community members. We're very grateful for the time they spent and the work they did. And what we're going to hear tonight, just very briefly, we'll go over their recommendations because we know that's a lot of information we brought in tonight. I think our eyes were bigger than our stomachs, as they say, when we first thought about what tonight would be like. But what we'll do next week, we both have board meetings next week, and at each of our board meetings, we'll go in greater depth and spend more time talking about each and every focus team's recommendation. So how does that sound? Does that make sense?
So,
Yes.
okay. So the next one is, can you hear me through here? Is that better? First focus group we have is cultural integration. And the purpose behind this is to explore traditions, celebrations, activities, athletics, mascots, identify opportunities to honor and integrate identities across both districts. And remember, these are recommendations. And just to kind of get us started, we kind of almost think about this as a catalyst to get us going. So for example, if we decided to move forward with the merger, we could start taking these recommendations from the focus team, put some more focus teams together, and really expand upon these recommendations, right? So this kind of gets us started to think. Because one of the biggest things we heard last year was, what does this new school district possibly look like, right? What can we possibly do? Now, we can't promise anything to the new boards in place and things of that nature, but if we can at least start to draw some recommendations of what it can start to look like. So here's the recommendations from the cultural integration team. Make prior combined integration of the 2 elementary schools periodically to help support transitions to middle school, which is extremely important. Where we do some things together constantly to kind of meet the students, get to know each other. So by the time we get to the middle school, there's no like, who is this student or who is this person? Recommendation 2, each school should have a list of committee members to support the planning and organization of events. Recommendation 3, start to hold professional development and faculty meetings together starting next year to start to look at what we can do together. Recommendation 4, preserve the alma mater of each elementary school. And we even talked about things like, I know we kind of hear the Cougars and the Hilltoppers, and we not want to believe this, but we're 90% merged in athletics, and we're kind of really not the Hilltoppers or the Cougars at this point because, we're combined sports. But we could be Hilltopper Elementary School, Cougar Elementary School to keep our traditions alive, which is extremely important.
The next group we have is educational programming, and they studied just that. And both Jen and Katrina led this group, starting with what we have right now. Their purpose was to analyze the curriculum, academic offerings, school configuration, program alignment, and long-term planning. And their guiding questions really did start with where are we right now and where would we like to be? So there was an aspirational piece as well. And those recommendations are: elementary level, have aligned curriculum and assessments and embed PBL that's both problem-based and project-based learning at all levels. Second recommendation, at the middle level, maintain a dedicated middle school building with robust elective opportunities to explore various career pathways. And that is an important recommendation on a lot of different levels for students who are at the middle level to develop themselves with their own voices and their own curriculum. It's a very important time of life. The recommendation number 3 is at the high school level to combine and grow current proposed academies and pathways currently offered at both Fort Plain and Canajoharie, and increase the number of AP and college and high school course offerings. The fourth recommendation was to provide more opportunities for in-district placement for students with disabilities at the CPSE and the CSE levels. That's keeping our kids at home. And recommendation 5 is to provide a parent information and training center.
Our next is operational planning, which reviews transportation, facility uses, scheduling, and operational logistics. And the recommendation for this committee was school-based childcare to support working families and increase access to early childhood education. As we start to have some open spaces, this would be a great avenue to look at. Recommendation 2, community-based health clinic at 1 or 2 or more of our buildings. You know, as we go down to one district, we have one district offices, for example. So maybe the other district offices can be used for something like a health-based clinic and also help generate revenue as well and offer service to our community. Recommendation 3, operational systems, comprehensive transition plan to include technology infrastructure, because we have 2 different types of technology, 2 different phone systems, right? 2 different security systems. Prioritize analyzing data security, compatibility, operations, and district community input from all stakeholders to make sure we're not missing anything along the lines with that. Recommendation 4, athletic and extracurricular facilities prioritize scheduling events and activities at buildings where students attend, so we're not shifting anymore back and forth, right, to different buildings. In preparation, conduct a comprehensive condition study of athletic fields and facilities to make sure we have those upgraded. And recommendation 5, transportation, bus routing to minimize vehicle travel time for students, provide for consistent daily schedules and optimize routes for fuel and maintenance efficiency. And right now, we're going to get information back from one of our routing systems to show what that would look like if both districts dumped into one, so we can kind of see how we can minimize those as much as we possibly can. So the theory behind something like that would be, hey, if we have a current longest route right now in 1 hour and 5 minutes, let's make sure we don't ever go over 1 hour and 5 minutes, right, for example. And we can look at different areas to do that. If you have to put another bus stop in that area, we can go ahead and do that. So that's kind of the plan with that. And recommendation 6, transportation, a late bus every day to ensure equity, provide access to programs and activities.
Brendan and took care of our student-centered transitions, and this was just thinking about what would our kids need if they were we were transitioning over to a merged district. That's the whole idea behind this. And it's thinking about what their needs are, what would we put in place in the interim, and then also in the very beginning times of being a merged district. The first recommendation is to bring students together as soon as possible, next year at all levels. Use Penpal programs, combining sports for younger students, join everyone on Star Day, provide building tours for grades 5 and 8, combine field trips, dances, holiday celebrations, and more. The thought being the sooner we get our kiddos together, the easier transition will be. In recommendation, I do want to mention this too. This particular group did have student representatives, and I think that made for a richer experience and really good feedback to this particular focus team. Recommendation 2 is to provide transition counseling. Just understanding that students who are transitioning are going to need an extra level of support. Recommendation 3 is to open all clubs to all students. And we're talking about in the next year. Recommendation 4 is to ensure equitable access to athletic practice. It's very important, they were saying, and I think you'd all agree too, that we have to think of equity and and ensuring that it's easy for everyone to get there. Recommendation 5 is to preserve our traditions and combine when we can. Recommendation 6, keep electives and expand the course and college offerings.
Next was staff center transitions, and the purpose of this is to address professional development, staff onboarding, cultural building, and support structures. Recommendation 1 here was to implement a whole district collaborative model of shared decision-making when creating a new school district. So as we talked about, these committees started, some catalysts. So as we get into next year, we have a whole year to kind of plan. It's a matter of getting those stakeholders together, and let's put together the best ideas possible moving forward. Recommendation 2, maintain the current teaching structure in each elementary school and early stages of transition, and then as we move forward, we'll look at what best fits in the future. Recommendation 3, cultivate a highly data-driven school culture by prioritizing professional learning opportunities and new teacher orientation, horizontal vertical team meetings to be designed to align instructional practices and improve student outcomes through collaborative data analysis. And we can kind of be consistent across the board with that. Recommendation 4, allocate collaborative time for teachers and staff in the summer preceding to the launch to integrate the new district framework. Emphasize on procedures, embedded SDL, restorative practices, conscious discipline, things of that nature. Recommendation 5, utilize a balanced staffing model that maintains a baseline of support in every school and strategically deploying additional personnel where student population data indicates it. So we can kind of analyze each area and see where we need the most people and the most supports. Recommendation 6, establish a district-sponsored early childhood center. You've heard that before. It was kind of neat about these groups, these committees, and we saw a lot of cross, right? Which is pretty neat because people were thinking the same thing. And as a cornerstone for staff recruitment and community engagement. Remember, we're trying to develop a district where people from Schenectady County and Herkimer County want to come to. They want to look at our district and say, this is the place I want to go and I want to work. This is the place I want to, I want to raise my child. That's the idea behind this because the model has changed. We don't get 50 people applying for jobs anymore. We got to recruit the best.
This really sums it up. And I think you could come to the same conclusion. We heard the same thing earlier from Dr. Timms. We need to be the architects of our own future. And for the reason here too, to provide our students at least the same opportunities others have throughout the state and country. Being your own architect of your future is you are the one deciding and creating it. And it really was interesting that no matter what your starting point was, these focus teams very often had crossover and came to the same conclusions. There were some very practical, very good, strong ideas that will be very easy to put into place, but it brings even more strength to the idea when it came from more than one direction. Very powerful work, and I think everyone's working doing that.
So again, we'll expand upon this at the next meeting. We'll board of education take this in for a week as a presentation, look at this. And again, this is a great catalyst. This is a great start for us to kind of really look at this and approach over the next year if it's approved, to really expand these opportunities and see what will really work. Again, recommendations are recommendations and the start for something so we can start looking at a bigger picture. So right now, we're going to have the Board of Education go up and we're going to take public comment. And then we'll have any discussion the board wants about the two topics that we went over today. Yep. We're just going to take a couple-minute break. People have to go to the bathroom real quick.